Hi, my name is Keegan Flegner. When I was in first grade, I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Since then, sports have played a huge role in helping me to cope with the mental and developmental challenges of being on the spectrum. So I want to help show the world that all kinds of sports can help all kinds of people with all kinds of challenges. Welcome to Sports on the Spectrum. My guest today is Jason Crandell. Jason is a yoga teacher and author with more than 20 years of experience. His classes are known for integrating the best elements of power yoga, anatomical precision, and mindfulness teaching. Named one of the best teachers shaping the future of yoga by Yoga Journal, Jason has been one of the most in-demand teachers at conferences around the world for over a decade. Jason has taught on countless teacher training faculties, leads trainings globally, and regularly presents teacher training content at esteemed conferences. Jason is a contributing editor for Yoga Journal magazine, where he has published over 25 articles. In addition, Jason is also the co-host of the Yogaland podcast with his wife, Andrea. Please join me in welcoming Jason Crandell to Sports on the Spectrum. All right, Jason. Well, it's great to have you with us today. And so I'm going to start off, like I do with most interviews, by asking about questions referring to the beginning. What I mean by that is when you were a kid. And so I'll start off by asking, what are some of your first memories of sports? And this can be watching them on TV, going to a game, following your favorite team, etc.
So I grew up in northwestern Ohio. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, near Detroit. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, every winter, the creek behind our house would freeze. Mm-hmm. Now, the creek does not freeze anymore, as we have a kind of global warming situation.
Oh, but, yeah.
You know, in the 70s, I was born in 1974. So that creek would freeze. And I have a brother who's 8 years older than I. And he got really interested in hockey before I have any memory of it, maybe even before I was born, to be honest. And so when that creek would freeze during winter, he and his friends would put on their skates and they'd go play hockey there. And then there was also a pond back there. And so watching them play and then starting to learn to skate on that pond and starting to play with them was the beginning. And then I think kind of somewhat subsequent to that, as we got just a little bit older, again, I was really young, but my brother played travel hockey. So I remember spending tons of time in ice rinks when I was like a little kid. And my favorite part was the Zamboni. Like it wasn't about it's probably like kids and mascots, right? But like, it wasn't so much about the game. It was about that Zamboni, but those are my earliest recollections.
No, that's great, man. As someone who's from Southern California, I really can't relate to
totally
ice skating too much.
Yeah, I understand.
But funnily enough, you mentioned the Zamboni. Whenever an ice skating rink comes to town in wintertime, I always remember as a kid loving every time the Zamboni would come on.
Yeah.
Clean the ice.
It was cool to watch. And then there was like, to me, it's weird, but there was such satisfaction of how efficiently that thing went from like cut ice to really like smooth, cleaned up ice. And then I don't know if you spent enough time with Zambonis to know, but like when it's done, it has essentially collected all that snow. So it has this thing that like lifts and like dumps all this snow. And then the person usually uses a shovel to shovel it away. So yeah, the whole thing was like mesmerizing to me as a kid. Yeah. I would still love to drive one, FYI.
Have you ever driven one?
I haven't. No. Aww. I think if I really like set my heart's desire and focus, if I put in full-time focus to getting on a Zamboni, I think I could make it happen.
Probably, but
yeah,
that's all good. That's great though, man. I could totally relate to that, even as someone who's from the sunniest place on earth.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and as someone who does not able to skate that much at all too.
Yeah.
But I totally get it. And that's great, man. And now I would ask also, kind of building off that a little, what do you say, as we've talked about your first memories, now let's talk about some of your favorite memories from your own sports experiences. So what do you got from that?
I think two things, right? I think only in this phase of my life would I call skateboarding a sport. But, you know, I probably spent at least as many hours, if not more, skateboarding in my life than hockey. So I think those are those two. So for hockey, I played travel from the
Mm-hmm.
time I was a little kid, so from like 5 or 6 to when I was a sophomore in high school. And then when I transitioned from being a sophomore in high school to playing for the high school team, it was the acknowledgement that this was as far as this game was going to go for me. Essentially, to play collegiate in hockey, the highest level players do not come out of high school teams. They don't. They go from what's called juniors, which is a travel league. And I
Mm-hmm.
got to the phase where I was playing juniors, and I was done. I mean, I physically realized maybe I could sit the bench for a Division I team in college, but I wasn't going to be pro. I didn't have the love for it anymore. So I kind of retired in a way into playing high school, but it was a blast because I got to actually play a lot more in front of my friends instead of playing at a higher level in travel. So I think just playing in high school for the team and being the captain of the hockey team, and then and actually this is you know who Jay Larinaga is,
Yes, I
right?
do know who that is.
So Jay Larinaga is currently an assistant coach for the Clippers, your
Yep.
favorite team, right?
Yep. My favorite team.
So Jay Larinaga was the captain of the basketball team when I was the captain of the hockey team. So we
Mm-hmm.
were friends. Anyways, so I think those memories, and then the skateboarding memories were kind of the same age, like high school, when I had that freedom to be with my friends and to be able to drive around and go skating in different places. So I think it was those, and in a lot of ways, it was about the game or the skating itself. I mean, I love those things, but it was also just about the friendships. It was about the camaraderie and feeling like I was getting to do this thing that I loved with friends.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting first talking about the skateboarding, and I'll be a little blunt and say it's not my favorite thing to do, and I probably haven't tried in years. But one thing I will tell you, I don't know if you remember, you're actually the person who got me my first skateboard years ago when I think I was like 7 or 8.
I think
Um,
now that you're saying it, it actually comes back. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
remember the
That.
moment. I remember the moment you gifted it to me because like
Oh, nice.
we were just about to leave for a trip, and so you gave gifts to everyone, and I
Yeah.
remember you pulled up the skateboard, and I was just like, "What?"
Well, a kid in Santa Monica, man, give me a
Yeah,
break. You
yeah, no,
gotta, you gotta, you gotta at least have the experience of having skated growing up in Santa Monica.
yeah, no. I gave it a few tries. I do remember, but as someone who's 6'1" with very long legs, I might add, it's not the easiest thing to learn. And
It's skateboarding is really hard. I still actually watch a lot of skateboarding on Instagram and YouTube. This is like the main things I still watch. And the skill level and the demands are incomprehensible. They are just it is really hard.
yeah, I'll tell
Yeah.
you this, it's interesting too, and lucky for you, I think you might remember, but skateboarding just became an official Olympic sport at
Yeah.
the most recent Olympics. And here's something you may not have known, but I did, and it's really cool. Just speaking total context, if by chance, some miracle, I went on to win a skateboarding gold, I would not actually be the first person named Keegan to win one, because someone named Keegan actually won a gold medal in skateboarding at the most recent Olympics in Tokyo.
Oh, what's the last name?
Think
You
it was
just
Palmer. Just like look up
Yeah.
skateboarding
Okay.
Olympics and you'll see
I'll
his
look at.
name,
Yeah.
but he won gold, and I watched
Nice.
his run, and it was insane. I was like, my God.
Yeah, it's so hard. Again, as someone who skateboarded for so long, it was never easy. Like hockey was never easy, but like I'll put it this way, it was a lot easier for me to be the level of hockey player I was
Mm-hmm.
than the level of skateboarder I was. And I was a much better hockey player than skateboarder. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally get that. And you mentioned also, hockey and the way in which you go pro. And I think that's really interesting because as someone who grew up playing basketball, and you mentioned being friends with the captain of the basketball team at your high school, it's like it's completely different on both levels, because in basketball, it is you go to high school, you go to college, and then you go pro. It's like it's very simple. Whereas in hockey, it's like you mentioned, high school is not how you get up to the pros. You do
It's
it through,
not. It's not. No one goes
and
that
the
route.
other thing too about hockey is, unlike basketball, at least in the past, now recently basketball is much more popular internationally, but in the past it was mainly American based. But with hockey, it's the opposite. Like
It is. That's
it
right.
grew out of Canada, it grew out
Yeah.
of Europe, it grew
Yeah.
out of a lot of places except but America.
That's right.
In addition to America, but still, it's like there's a lot more competition out there. So I totally get
for
how
sure.
the system is completely different to provide sort of an equal playing field, but at the same time, it's a lot harder to get into it. So yeah, cool. All right. Yeah. So next up, you mentioned you did hockey in high school, you did skateboarding in high school. I think you do a little bit now, but correct me if I'm wrong. But either way,
really neither.
okay.
Yeah, neither.
Okay.
I get the skates on every couple of years, but that's about it.
Okay.
I do not stand on a skateboard at all. No way.
Yeah,
I would be fine. The thing, it's not that I couldn't skate. I mean, I could like jump on a skateboard and push and go like, do whatever.
right.
But I don't think I would have the restraint to not make a bad choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get you right there.
And the thing is, skating, you make like, especially being older, you make a bad choice, and there's concrete down there.
Oh yeah, no, don't make me think about that, because then it brings me back to my own memories. But so you don't play either of those now. But what sports do you still play now, and how did you get involved with them, and what about them appeals to you?
So I started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 6 years ago. And I've trained really hard and really consistently. And what kind of got me involved was so when I was a kid, like so many kids in the 80s, I did karate and taekwondo.
Kid.
Right? Like every kid does. And as an adult, those things are more they're more movement-based arts, and they're discipline-based arts, but they're not as martial as many of the other martial arts, in that they are not, for the most part, they're not highly combative. It's not that they don't train certain fighting skills, they do, but that sport is a little bit more it's a little bit more of a sport-based and a movement-based discipline than a self-defense or a real combative discipline. And, as you might guess, like, even though I'm a yoga teacher, which we'll talk about, I grew up playing hockey. Like I've always liked combative sports. Like I always loved the physicality of hockey. And I love the intensity and the physical combat in the appropriate environment. Like it's always something I've always loved to do. And so when I started to learn a little bit more about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I had wanted to come back to a martial art, and one that was just, to be honest, like the hardest one, in the time it takes to get one belt progression in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in a lot of our other martial arts, you could go from white belt to black belt. Wow. It's the hardest martial art discipline to gain rank in. And it's the most overt combative. Now, this is not including boxing or Muay Thai, but in terms of like what we would think of as like a more conventional martial art. And so, long story short, I wanted to do this, and I met a person who was a student of mine who was a really high level competitor, and he urged me to do it. And I started training, and I fell in love with it. And it's incredibly demanding, but we'll get to the conversation about ADHD. But I think in retrospect, for me to focus my attention, I need to fully engage my physicality. It's really the only place that I focus. I really only am completely focused when I'm teaching yoga, or when I'm doing something that is bringing me to my almost physical breaking point. And again, I don't mean that like in a crazy way, but like something that's really demanding of all my physical sensory mechanisms focuses me, and teaching focuses me. And so I fell in love with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the way that it helps me attune to what's happening in the moment in a way that that my yoga practice also does, but it's much more demanding than a yoga practice. I mean, yoga can be really demanding too, but no one's trying to break your arm or choke you unconscious when you're doing yoga. And if someone is, you got a problem. That's not supposed to be happening in that environment. So I train 3 or 4 days a week, pretty religiously, if you will. So I put a lot of hours on the mat, and I would do more, but my body can't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it just literally can't. I do that sport to it the maximum that I can do it while still functioning in the other aspects of my life.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's totally get what it means when your body can't, keep up with you. Like my dad, my dad's only a few years older than you, and he's trying to do marathon running, and it's like the body is just like, nope.
It's like things just go from working to breaking. You know what I mean? There's just like there's no like middle. It's like an old car. You're like, I don't even know if they make that part anymore, bro.
Yeah.
So it's I still in a way have a very, I don't mean to be too self-deprecating about this. I still in a way I have a very like childlike athlete competitor mindset where I'm like, I can do this. I can keep pushing it. It's not going to hurt. But I'm getting more mature and just trying to, it's not like I'm trying to train less. It's that I'm trying to be more active, not more active, more decisive and consistent with the recovery that kind of output requires.
Totally. I'm only 19, and I'll tell you firsthand, like, I know that I do not have the same energy I had when I was 10 years old. It's like getting older takes that away from you sooner than you think, honestly.
Yeah, it changes for sure.
Yeah. But I think you're right on the nose there about how being active and being in an intense environment like in jiu-jitsu is what makes it so enjoyable. Because especially for me, what made basketball so great is because it allowed me to engage in an environment where you have to be consistently focused and consistently engaged in what's happening if you want to be successful. And honestly, it's like, obviously, when we're comparing jiu-jitsu and hockey with basketball, it's like there's a very clear winner in terms of who would prevail in head to head, if you know what I mean. But at the same time, basketball is very physical in terms of what it demands of your body and your mind. And it's just, I think the common point here is like all these sports are great for us because they require us to focus and they require us to use up our energy in a way that's enjoyable. And, it allows us to get it out in a sense. Because I think, honestly, the real thing we're trying to accomplish here is we're just trying to get some energy out, get it out of our head.
Yeah. The other thing that you have with more of a group sport, though, compared to jiu-jitsu, is in jiu-jitsu, it's dynamic and it's complex, but it's one person to one person.
Right.
But playing hockey or playing basketball, hockey and basketball and soccer, they all have kind of like, they're very different sports, but they have a similar movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be aware in those of, in a way, a slightly more complex set of variables because there's just more people, right? Mm-hmm. And so the positioning, and you have to have like very macro eyes for what's happening all around you and kind of the set plays and the systems and so forth. So all of these sports, I think, engage our physicality and our focus to their maximum and in slightly different ways, but they're all of those are going to fully soak us in.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's like, when you're playing those kinds of sports, you not only have to focus on yourself, but you have to keep an eye on your teammates.
Exactly.
Especially like if you're the one with the ball in your hands, because the classic saying is don't be a one-man show. It's like you gotta look for your teammates to see where they are, and just it's like you said, it broadens the thinking, it broadens the perspective, and it just makes it more engaging. And for me at least, and I'm sure for you, it made it more fun because it wasn't just about what we had to do. It's about what everyone else had to do and how we respond to that. And, it's what prepares you for life in a lot of ways.
I think actually this is, I might be making a connection. I've thought about this for a long time. I might be making up a connection that isn't really there. You know how we do that sometimes, but I think, so one of the things about having ADHD is one of the upsides is because my mind is going a lot of different places simultaneously. I get big picture stuff very well. Like I see how complex dynamics are, right? I'm not like, I don't like see a thing. I don't see a subject and be like, oh, this is a simple, small subject. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I can see like all the different ways that it's complex. And for me, I think with hockey, the thing that I was best at was making plays. I always led my teams in assists. I never led my teams in goals. I always led in assists and penalty minutes. True story. But I never once led in goals. Mm-hmm. So I think that I was always able to see the game really well, in part because that's how my brain works. It's like, it's better at seeing all of the things going on than tuning into one of the things going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned you led your team in penalty minutes.
I did.
Probably for me.
That's a straight line. I was in so when I teach in London, most evenings after I'm done, I train jujitsu. I have friends there and I train, and the place I go to is called London Fight Zone. And there was an Uber driver who was like, he picked me up from a yoga studio. And he noticed, like, okay, I'm picking you up from a yoga studio and I'm taking you to a place called Fight Zone. And he's like, aren't you supposed to be calm because you're a yoga teacher? I'm like, why do you think I need yoga? Like, I don't practice and do and teach yoga because I'm already well regulated, buddy. So, yeah, I had a, especially in high school, I think before I got a little more mature, I really had a hard time controlling my temper, especially playing hockey. Like so that's why, yeah, I could set up plays and I could create penalties. Those were kind of the things I was exceptional at.
Yeah. I mean, in basketball, we don't have penalty minutes, but we
got fouls.
Well, we got fouls and we got technical fouls. And that's probably what I led my team on, if anything. So I totally relate to you there.
Yeah.
But I guess now, you talk about yoga, and honestly, for me, for as long as I've known you growing up, it's always been about how you're a world famous yoga teacher who travels the globe. And honestly, for a while, you were probably like the closest thing I knew to a celebrity. So I kind of idolized you.
Sure.
In that sense. And I was also kind of jealous at the same time because you get to go to all these places. Well, I was like, I want to go.
It's, it's sensible to be jealous for a period of time. You can be both. You can be like, oh, I wish I got to go to all those places. And man, I'm glad I didn't have to go to all those places.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I am well known in a small niche. Mm-hmm. And in a way that's kind of nice, right? Because once every couple of months, like a random stranger in a random place, like, hey, you're Jason, I take classes with you online. But for the most part, I get to be perfectly anonymous and live a totally normal, non-celebrity life, which is awesome. But then in this one thing that I do a lot, I get recognition, which is also nice. Like it's kind of it's a nice, sweet little spot to be well known in a very small world.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I guess I would ask now, why don't you take us back to what got you into this and kind of how it's grown over time to get you to this point of what I would call a Goldilocks zone of popularity.
So you've done a good job with kind of laying out and pulling out my backstory. So I told you that I played hockey through high school, mm-hmm. and that I kind of knew, like I went to Miami University and they have a Division I hockey team. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I maybe could have made that team and sat the bench, like I would have been fourth string. And I decided that like I wouldn't do walk-ons. I certainly didn't get recruited because no one gets recruited out of high school, or if they do, it's very, very rare. And so I went to college and I skateboarded a little bit, but for the most part, when I went to college, I stopped doing anything physical. Like I would work out here and there. I didn't just like lay down, you know what I mean? But like I kind of like I was done playing those sports. And I think it was like 3.5 years because it was till I was almost graduating.
Mm-hmm.
And I got pretty depressed. And I don't know. I I don't want to completely associate that with not doing physical. Who knows? But so long story short, my girlfriend at the time, I needed a 1 credit hour. And to get that, it was like the kinesiology department.
Mm-hmm.
And my girlfriend at the time really wanted to do yoga. And so I'm like, okay, whatever. So I went, and it was really hard in a completely different way. So it was, like all of the physical things I have done were really outwardly focused and very dynamic. But then I came to yoga and it's very inwardly focused and very static. So
Mm-hmm.
it didn't mean it was easy, but like the static demands of holding a yoga pose for a minute or like down dog or plank for a minute was excruciatingly hard. And I and I um and I was really frustrated. Like I didn't really realize how much I took using my body skillfully for granted. And I was blown away by the difficulty of this class and how frustrating I got, even though it seemed like we weren't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I got to see my body and my mind literally in that first class in just a different way than I had really ever experienced them. And I did not enjoy it. But when I left class, I felt really good. And that happened all semester because there's a whole semester of class.
Right.
I think 2 days a week for a full semester, or maybe it was 1 day a week. I honestly don't remember. And I just hated every class. But after every class, I felt so much better. And it just stuck. And then when that class was over, when I finished that semester, I started doing like yoga VHS with Rodney Yee, who became my teacher, and I would go to a local yoga studio, and it just stuck. And it wasn't that I felt particularly successful at the postural practice. It was that I was learning a way of being in my body that I had never experienced before. I always felt better afterwards. And to be honest with you, I hadn't really realized it, but it was really nice to use my body in a non-sport environment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I got to and my teachers were really good. Most teachers are pretty good at like communicating, hey, this isn't a competition. But I didn't really understand how to use my body in a non-competitive way, right?
Yep. Totally.
And it was just genuinely such a mental and emotional relief to not feel like I had to accomplish. And even to this day, even though, we talked like, I like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I like to compete, I work hard, I want to win the rounds that I do. But in my yoga asana practice, I am not competitive. Like I don't care what my body can do and can't do. Like I don't care. I just do my best on any given day. And that has been a huge maturation for me. And it's been hugely valuable.
Yeah, no, that totally resonates. And it's interesting too, you talk about college, because for me, I'm now entering my sophomore year of college, and it's like all these things in association with that, they all make sense. Interestingly, though, I'll tell you something. I don't know if you knew this, but what you do know is that for my freshman and half of my sophomore year, I went to a big public high school. And then after that, I went to a small private high school. And while, I had my own struggles at the big public high school, the last semester I was there, one of the best things I took out of it was, because it's so big and all, they actually had a yoga class. And I took that yoga class, and I will tell you, it was one of the best things I ever did, because, you know, similar to the experience you had when you took it in college, it's like, it was a very different experience. But every time I did it, I came out feeling great, came out feeling relaxed, came out feeling strong. And it did something that helped me to kind of get through all those other struggles I was having. And, you know, eventually it led me to a better place. And, you know, I mean, I haven't really done much yoga beyond that, but at the same time, what I took away from that was like, this is a really good experience, you know, and it's just, there's a lot to learn from doing something like that. So, you know, I think that's something that is very interesting about yoga.
Yeah, that's great. No, I knew you had taken class, but I didn't know that it resonated so much with you. Yeah, I mean, that's great. And, you know, especially, I almost think that when you're practicing yoga at a more formative age, like when you're in high school, I almost feel like our body is changing at a rate that our mind isn't always processing.
Mm.
And so there's like a physical awkwardness that comes with growth. You know what I mean? It's like you even see it in like adolescent dogs that are like getting really big. They get kind of like fumbly and floppy, right? And it's kind of like the body is like it's like changing at a rate that the brain hasn't like completely mapped out yet. And so for a lot of reasons, including just kind of inhabiting our body a little bit more skillfully. Yoga's great at any age, but it's great when you're in high school.
Yeah. And before we move on, I'd like to just get a little more out of you on the yoga. You know, obviously, you know, you talked about how you got into that. Now you do it all around the world, you
Mhm.
know, and
Less so
less
these days,
so
for
because
sure.
obviously because of COVID, you know, you
Yeah.
had to transition to online courses. But I guess before and after, and also when you started doing online, it's like when you're teaching these courses, what is your objective, and kind of like what do you look for, at least when you're in person, like with the people around you?
When I'm teaching teachers, to be honest with you, I'm looking for their empathy. I'm looking for not their eye contact, but like their ability to like relate to people in front of them. And I'm looking for the critical thinking skills
Hmm.
because I tell this to everyone, like you have two really basic things. You have the subject matter, and then you have what goes into teaching that subject matter. And I always feel like what goes into teaching the subject matter is that much more important because, with all due respect to myself and to yoga, it's, with some exceptions, it's not incomprehensible. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not to be cliche, but like it literally isn't rocket science. Like, you don't have to have the kind of brain that can process algorithms and do things. Like, there are some very unique aspects of like a good yoga teacher's brain, but I don't think the subject of yoga is so complicated that like an average diligent person that cares can't get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I genuinely think that. But when it comes to teaching to me is the harder but more important skill than the subject matter itself. So you need to have passion for the subject matter, but like you can learn more about anatomy, you can learn more about philosophy, you can learn more about technique. Like, you can always learn more. And I feel like learning yoga ages well because, unlike some of the sports that we're talking about, like yoga is really easy to practice at different age, at different stages of life, because there's so many different layers to it, even so many different layers to its physicality. But there aren't that many. I mean, I could still play hockey, but it doesn't age as well to me as a yoga practice does. So when I'm working with teachers and teaching trainings, I'm really wanting people to understand concepts. I'm really wanting people to understand how to engage with a group. I'm really wanting people to understand that different people learn different ways. So if you want to teach A, B, and C, you better have a couple of different ways to communicate that. If you can only say A, B, and C and hope everyone understands it, that's not going to work. So as a teacher, you have to really think about communication skills and empathy and patience. And teaching is a more like there's, in a way, it's those deeper, more human skills in terms of people's ability to do postures. I want them to be technical and skillful. But another thing that I really understand is everyone has really different raw attributes, right? And we know this from our sports, right? Like there are some people that are just really talented.
Yeah.
They are just born into a body that's 6'10", that's 250, that's strong. And this is not to take anything away from them, but there are certain raw attributes in your gene pool you have or you don't have.
Right.
And it's the same in terms of doing postures. Like some people are they naturally have a body type that can do the harder, more demanding things, and other people don't have that body type. So I'm less interested in kind of your raw ability and much more in just your ability to work with yourself and others in a sensible way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you talk about trying to improve those attributes that you're not born with. I remember I actually took some of your online courses to try to improve my core, because my core is it's weak, man. It ain't there.
Well, that is an attribute you might not have, but you can generate.
Yeah, no. And it's hard too to generate.
It is hard.
But you know, I totally get what you're saying about how you teach people to have empathy, you teach them to, you know, adjust, and you teach them to be able to make seemingly obscure concepts appear as simple as they really are.
That's exactly. Yeah.
This isn't yoga, but still I find it relevant. Like, I am not going to be a rocket scientist. I didn't know anything about physics before my junior year of high school, and yet I managed to pass AP physics as a junior in high school. So it's like, you know, this is not impossible by any means.
You can learn. Like you can learn the content. That's what I mean about yoga. It's like you can learn the content.
Right.
And it's an infinitely vast pool. You're not going to learn everything about everything, but it's more the human qualities that I think are important than just the attributes.
Yeah, no, totally. And I guess now let's kind of talk about those human attributes, specifically with how they regard to the mind. And I'll start off by asking a question that I ask every person I interview, because I think it's very relevant to both how general it is, but also how broad it is. So my question is, when you hear the term mental health, what pops into your head and what does it mean to you?
I mean, I think I get very literal. The first, like literally, you asked what popped in my head. The word anxiety popped in my head, because that's the mental health challenge that I have the greatest of, right? So having ADHD, like I've managed to carve out a life where that in and of itself is not that complicated. And in a lot of ways, like it's a set of super skills, but I struggle with anxiety much less so, like, because I've learned to manage it better. And, but I think when I think mental health, I think, when the mind is not healthy, whether it's an obsessive compulsive disorder, whether it's an anxiety disorder, whether it's depression, whether it's bipolar, whatever. I think the first thing I think of is the opposite of mental health, right? Mental not health.
Right.
And then I think that for me, the health is when those factors are either absent or managed. Yeah, I think that's what comes up for me personally.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it points to an interesting, I'm not going to call it stereotype or bias or anything, but it's still relevant in that you mentioned, for a lot of people, not just yourself, when they think of mental health, it's like you said, they think of people who are not mentally healthy.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's not a bad thing per se, because it brings more awareness. But at the same time, it's interesting that, you know, when you talk about something like that, you almost always associate it with, you know, something that's not necessarily positive.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think that's a very interesting observation.
Yeah.
And I guess let's kind of dig into that a little more. And you've mentioned ADHD a few times now. So let's discuss that, starting with what is ADHD and how does it affect people, including yourself? And do they feel it every day or only on occasion? You know,
I think
yeah,
what I want to do, because I'm not I don't feel like I can speak about this hugely objectively. So
you
I'll
don't
talk
have
about it
to.
subjectively. I'll talk about
That's
my
perfectly fine.
experience of it.
That's
Yeah.
perfectly fine.
I think for me, the thing to understand, and I think this is for a lot of people, is that ADHD is probably a little bit mislabeled,
Mm-hmm.
because the attention deficit, I don't always have attention deficit. In fact, I and so many other people with ADHD, there's the opposite side, which is we have hyperfocus.
Right.
When we're doing the thing that we're dropped in, we can do that thing typically longer, more focused than anyone else. So when
Right.
I'm teaching in class, I can stand and talk for 4 hours. And no one can do that. Like, I can stand and talk for 4 hours. I do it. I've done it year after year after year after year. You ask most anyone on the planet to give a 4-hour presentation or a 15-minute presentation, they're going to have a heart attack. But I can go in front of 120 people and do a 4-hour masterclass with no notes, easy. Because when I am tuned in, everything else falls away. So the attention deficit doesn't mean that there is always an attention deficit. It's a little bit more of an executive functioning and executive planning thing. So it's kind of like, I think a good way to think about it is, if you think about an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's kind of your mind, like the
Right.
mind orchestra. When one instrument or one aspect of mind starts to play, theoretically those others play with it, or they give it a solo and they kind of get quieter while that thing plays. My experience of ADHD is like all of the instruments are playing, but they're playing the same volume,
Right.
and they're playing at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not harmonizing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all of these different highly engaged bits of mind content, and it's very difficult to focus on one of them because the others are not tuning in with that or getting quiet. So I have lists everywhere. Okay, like lists. Here's a list.
All right.
Here's a list.
Method to the
Here's a
madness.
list. Okay. These
All
lists are
right.
pretty much from today.
Okay.
Because if I don't list things out, all of those different bits of mine, it's kind of like broken glass, not to be
Right.
dramatic, but it's like there's tons there, but they're not cohesive. They're not working together. So in my mind, I have many different thoughts and many different demands that are happening simultaneous. That in and of itself is probably not that abnormal or difficult. It's that it's very difficult to settle into a task,
Mm-hmm.
because the moment I settle into a task, the other tasks pull me away.
Right.
And then I settle into that task and a different task pulls me away. So I will be writing an email and then I'll start a social media post. And then I won't finish the social media post. I'll realize I have to text Andrea.
Yeah.
And then halfway through a text from Andrea, I realize I have to call my mom. It's that kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's that kind of like, and the thing is like, most brains might have all of those things. And you know, all of those things might be able to be pulling your attention at the same time, but most brains would finish one of those tasks
right
before initiating another task.
Yeah.
And so what can start to happen over time is avoidance patterns, because you're like, man, to get through this email that I don't want to do is going to be really difficult. And so, you know what? I'm going to go train today. I'm going to go train jujitsu because that I can focus in. You know what? I'm going to film a class because that I can focus in. Oh, I'm going to go create content. Like I'm going to go create a curriculum because that I can focus into. So you have these areas that you can really hyper focus into, whereas everything else, you don't even get like a thing done. You don't get like a text written before you make a call.
Right.
And that's where it's like, it's almost like the filtering mechanisms they're not there. Everything just like, it's like sand that just like kind of everything is just like pushing together.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's so interesting because you're not the first person I've interviewed who has experience with ADHD, because I've had others in the past, including one of my former teammates, who has very high ADHD, and he takes medication to help deal with it. But he specifically, I think he literally used the word hyper-focused when he talked about what it's like for him and how when he's focused on certain things, he's as focused as ever, whereas with other things, that's the problem, you know?
Yes.
It's just
And
like,
then
go
it
ahead.
becomes this very self-fulfilling thing, right? Because I'll say we, but I start to avoid all the stuff that we know we're going to really struggle with. And then we start to pursue and focus and do the things that we know that we're going to be able to focus into. That has an upside, but that also has a downside, right? And that's where I say, like, when it's the things that I can focus into, it becomes very self-selective. And that's where we get into like these avoidance patterns and these like incredible skill versus total avoidance patterns.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally get that with how, it's like, and when it comes to, doing stuff that we like, it's like we want to do that all the time. But it's like when there's stuff that we have to do, but we know we don't want to do, it's like sometimes we go to extreme lengths to avoid it, and
Yes,
it happens again and again and again. Like I've had that experience at school with my schoolwork. Like it's not healthy,
totally.
but I totally get you there. And I guess, you talk about how that's a fairly common trend, and I mentioned that you're not the first person to mention hyperfocus. So why don't we talk about, we've talked about your experience. Let's talk about other people's experience. And
Sure.
first, I'd like to start with someone personal to both of us, and that's your daughter, because we know she has ADHD.
Yeah.
And so I would ask, like, wait, as a father to her and seeing her grow, what has been your experience? What have you noticed as, she's dealt with knowing she has ADHD and finding ways to cope with it? Like, for example, like us, she likes sports in the sense she loves horse riding.
Totally.
Like, so
Yeah.
what has that been like?
Andrea, my wife,
Yep.
your aunt,
My aunt.
sees me in a way more clearly than she ever has because she sees Sophia.
Mhm.
And we are so similar. It is shocking. And mostly in, I think, super great ways. I'm really proud. But I think what we see with her is very similar things, which is a very difficult time initiating tasks, especially non-preferred tasks. Now, everyone would be like, well, like everyone has a hard time. The thing to understand about these things is all about a scale and about functionality. Like we all avoid stuff we don't want to do. We all focus better on stuff we want to do. We all do better in things that we enjoy. Like we all do this. But what we're talking about here is a relative scale of functioning. And what we really experienced with her were pretty substantial challenges in initiating various tasks and completing various tasks, and remembering various tasks, all of which can be difficult for kids, but the kind of challenges that were pretty obvious that she had a neurotype that was challenged by finishing a task, starting a task,
Yep.
completing a task, like any of these things, like we put a shoe on and then forget to put the other shoe on, right?
Right.
And then you also see this other thing, which is brilliance in other ways, right? So it's I was having this mind of like, no, it's not that she lacks competency, it's that she has this incredibly skillful, dexterous mind, but a much higher than average challenge to staying on task. And that's whether it's with me, with Andrea, with school, like very, very different things. So like consistent patterns. The other thing we really noticed with her is like me is the need to constantly move. Like even when she was, I mean, and again, if you listen, all kids need to move. Totally all kids need to move.
Of course.
But watching her go to sleep was literally like 2 hours of someone like swimming in bed. I mean, just like constant movement for hours all the time. What she has really fallen in love with over the last 3 years is equestrian. And equestrian is so amazing for her because it's unbelievably physical,
right?
But also she's highly sensitive. And so her sensitivity helps her tune in to the horse.
Yeah.
And she's able, they're able to really bond and understand. She's able to really take cues from the horse and relate to horses and animals in a very, very profound and subtle way. She's extremely perceptive. And so that combination of her perceiving the nuances of the animal she's on and responding accordingly, and also the physicality of it, have made it it's just an amazing sport for her.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting because, when you talk about a sport like equestrian, the horse is basically equivalent to like your teammate,
Yeah,
on
totally.
the court or on the ice. But I would argue, and I'm sure you would agree, dealing with a horse is in a lot of ways more difficult than dealing with a person, because with a horse, you need to know how they're feeling and you need to know how to respond to that. And obviously, because they don't speak, it's like you need to do that in other ways. And it's
100%.
that's usually a lot harder to get the hang of. But when you have heightened sensitivity, like Sophia does, it becomes a lot easier, I would imagine.
Yes. Yeah. It's the right attribute, right? It's like being giant and muscular is really helpful to be a linebacker. Being super tall and agile is really helpful to be a center.
Right.
Being highly attuned to an animal is pretty ideal for an equestrian, right? It's like it's a natural. It's one of these things like everyone can become more skillful in what they do through practice and consistency, but different people have certain natural abilities, and she just has the right natural ability to tune into the horse she's on.
No, I mean,
thank God, I wouldn't want her on a horse without.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It also speaks to why you have such an awesome dog too in your house.
Yes, we do.
Oh my God. I love that
Yes,
dog.
we do.
I guess before I move on to the next question, I would kind of expand on what I just asked. And aside from your daughter, have there been any other people you've interacted with, whether it be in a class or in jujitsu or whatever, who you thought might have ADHD or some other sort of neuroatypical condition? And
I mean, totally. But my mom, myself, and my daughter, we're all very similar, very, very similar. And then because I'm just open. I mean, I don't wear on my sleeve, but I'm open about pretty much everything. A lot of students have come up to me and be like, I have ADHD, blah, blah, blah. Handful of students with ADHD, autism crossover.
Right.
And then, yeah, people, I think there's some people I train with that probably train the way they train the frequency they train, the intensity that they train, the skill level they train, in part because they have a neurotype that does that well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe is not as suited to doing some other things.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I guess I would ask, now that you've answered that you have interacted with those people, when you did interact with those people, such as, for example, when you were teaching yoga, did you ever change how you interact with them or how you taught
Not at
them?
all.
No?
No, I don't. It's not a thing. To me, it's like, I feel so, I mean, I on some level, I go back and forth of like, I think we're all neurodiverse. Like, I don't know that I've met those, like, I don't even know who neurotypical people are. I just think they're hiding it. I don't know. I don't even know. So I just try to treat everyone kind of the same.
Hey,
I don't, maybe I'm a little bit more, maybe I'm a little bit more, I don't think I lacked sensitivity around the challenges and issues, but I think the bottom line is no. I think I already normalize whatever range of humanness we already have. Like, I think we're all crazy. You know what I mean? I'm like, everyone's got something.
yeah,
We're all just, I think the human condition is complicated. I think it's more complicated than culturally we like really pretend.
mm-hmm.
So when someone discloses like they have or they are X, Y, or Z, I'm like, put it on the list, man. We're
Right.
all just doing our best.
I think that's very interesting because it's like there are those people who, work to, make it stand out for better or worse.
Sure.
And then there are those who are just like, okay, you know what? You have this, that's fine, but it's like we all have this stuff. And it's like we all can get through it if we just maybe don't view it at least in the negative sense and just kind of
Yeah.
like to look for those positives and just
Yeah.
kind of, make everyone feel like it doesn't matter if you have this stuff. It's like we're just like each other in that way.
Yeah.
So
And I'm most prone, for better and for worse, I'm most prone to downplaying things and kind of joking. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just an ultimate kind of downplayer with, for better. You know what I mean? I could tell my mom like my right arm fell off and she'd be like, "Oh, well, that's okay, sweetie. Can you still work?" I'm like,
oh man.
literally, that would be the conversation. So for better and for worse, I think that's how I am with people. It's like, you are who you are. I don't, whatever you need. The other thing too is like, I hope this doesn't sound too weird, but like, I care for all my students, but I'm not so emotionally invested and I'm not a therapist.
Right.
So people aren't coming to me one-on-one for a diagnosis, for a treatment, for this,
Right.
that, or another thing. They're in group with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to be an ally to people. And that's it, because I'm like, ah, I can't in a group be like, okay, well, then we're going to change. We're going to completely pivot to meet. And it's like, what do you need? Do you need a little bit more time? You need more time to finish the assignment? No worries.
Yeah.
You need to like remind you or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I would actually ask really quickly before I move on, we've talked about how you traveled all the time. Now you don't do it as much because, COVID has made a lot of things online now. And I would just ask, kind of as a little bit of a side note, when comparing in-person teaching with online teaching, what do you think makes either easier or harder in this sense of like assisting certain people or just, kind of making sure they have the resources to be successful in your class?
Let me limit the answer specifically to ADHD.
Sure.
I think ADHD is harder
Mm-hmm.
to study online. And that's what my business is like,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think it's harder
Right.
because it's easier, it's more convenient,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes things that are more convenient are easier to not do.
Right.
And so you get excited to do it and to start, but it's really hard when you don't have a cohort or you don't have a strong schedule. So for me, it's not difficult to study, to do yoga, to train, because I really like those things. But it would be harder for me if I were taking
Right.
an online training on yoga philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be harder for me to sit down and push play than it would be to be at that room from 1 to 2 p.m. So I think online learning for pretty much everyone is just as effective, and if it's done well, it can engage you really well. But for someone that has a really hard time pushing play and task initiation and task management, it can be harder for sure. You need, which isn't to say that it isn't doable, but it's to say you need a greater support structure. Like you need to be like, okay, this is really going to happen at this time with this group on this schedule. You need to be more beholden to a group and to a schedule if you're going to get something like that done.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's interesting because at college, because I go to Texas, it's like there are actually still some of my classes that are either half online or full online, or you can choose. And for me, it's been interesting kind of exploring both sides of that spectrum, as you outlined, where it's like to be there, it forces you to focus. And in a lot of ways, that's good. But at the same time, if you're online, it's like, yes, there's less work, but it also is much harder to focus. And so I've been kind of experimenting with that for the past year. And, I've learned a lot from it. So I can totally get where you're coming from. I guess now we've talked about sports, we've talked about the spectrum. Now let's sort of combine those, and I'll ask, how do sports, and specifically yoga, because we've talked a lot about that, help you to better understand and or address mental, emotional, and developmental challenges? And how do they benefit those who have them in ways that other things can't,
I mean, I think the key bit to the sport is not the competition. That can be helpful for some. It can be a hindrance to others.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing about the sport is actively engaging with physicality. I think it is extremely difficult to, our body and our mind are so fully integrated, right? Like there's no, they are not two different things.
No.
You couldn't separate them if you tried. Nothing is purely mental. Nothing is purely physical.
Not at all.
And so the thing to me about sport, whatever the sport is, if it's, everywhere from Brazilian jiu-jitsu and skateboarding to like a table tennis and like, I don't know, golf, right? Like
golf.
I think the thing is that you are intentionally and skillfully doing something with your body. You're moving your body and using it in intentional ways, and that in and of itself is inherently beneficial. And so I think then for many people, sport also gives a culture. It gives a group.
Mm-hmm.
It gives a community. It gives a shared sense of purpose. And I think even through trials and tribulations of winning and losing, like losing is really important for people,
Mm-hmm.
because it helps you realize like you can get through things. It that process of winning and losing and engaging with community towards something that is bigger than just you, I think is also inherently beneficial in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
For me specifically, having a sport or a physical hobby also gives me something else to obsess about instead of just my job. I think it's really important. Like for me at this phase, like I play a sport, but really I think about it more like I have a hobby. I have a physical hobby that is a sport.
Right.
And it's something that I can focus on. It's something that I can obsess on. It's something I can give attention to that balances out all of the work that I do, all the focus that I do, all of the normal stresses of being an adult. So it's also this like, it's also an escape. So I think all of these things are positive for our mental health. And also I think finally just like our sense of self and our sense of continuing to move towards a goal. And, when you get older, that goal changes. You might not be like looking to be the professional athlete or whatever it is, but I think with consistency and maturity, you realize like, so long as you're continuing to give it your all towards a pursuit, there's still a positive sense of self that comes from that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's like, I know I'm not going to be playing the NBA, but it's like, I still play basketball,
Yeah.
At college, it's like they've got intramural sports, which are specifically designed for students who are not student athletes,
Totally.
It's like, the goal is not to, achieve, fame or anything like that. It's just to get your body going and, have a good time while you're doing it.
Yeah.
There's the age old saying, if you love doing what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So it's like, for you at least to have the opportunity to teach yoga for a living, it's like, I would imagine how much benefit that's brought you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I got one more question lined up here, but before I do, I'd just like to ask firsthand if you have any other thoughts or suggestions that you'd like to share.
No, I think you've covered it so well. Just the structure and the conversation, I think is really, really comprehensive.
Good. I'm glad. Well,
Yeah.
In that case, let's wrap things up with the question that I always like to end my interview with, because it's a great way to kind of leave our audience here with a good thought, if nothing else, honestly. And that's that, over the course of time, much progress has been made, especially in recent years, on dealing with mental health and conditions like ADHD, whether it be medication or therapy or whatever. But as like with anything that, starts, there can still be a stigma associated with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to ask here is, if there's any one thing that you want someone listening to this podcast to know about your experiences with these challenges, that they should better understand or appreciate more.
Yeah, great question. Well, one, again, not something I wear on my sleeve, but not something I hide. But since you're asking, I have taken psychiatric medication for a little over 10 years, and it has remarkably improved the quality of my life. It has not made me not me. I'm still me.
Yeah,
for
I know.
better and for worse. And I think in addition to that, like obviously I'm a yoga teacher. I believe in mindfulness. I believe in being self-reflective. I believe in self-ownership. I believe in like all sorts of personal self-responsibility. I also believe in getting help wherever we can get help. Like there's no chivalry in suffering in silence. Like it's just such a like weird or outdated thing. Like this is the one life, probably. Maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe not. We don't know. We don't know.
But we'll put it this way. This could possibly be the one life. Like use whatever resources you can use to be well. And if in doubt, like seek multiple professionals. And do sometimes professionals get things wrong? Totally.
Of course.
But that doesn't, because someone gets something wrong doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek support. Right. So whatever it takes, just like, I mean, it's, pretty basic, but just like you would do things to take care of your body, like do things to take care of your mental and emotional wellness. And if you are well regulated and functioning and happy, and you don't have a need for any kind of therapy or medical intervention, don't get them. But if you need or are considering exploring options to live a more comfortable mental or healthier life, then seek that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally get what you're saying. And it's like you said, like this, we're not saying that every treatment is for everyone.
Totally.
but it can be very helpful for some people. Like for me, like I don't take medication, but I did do therapy all the way from when I got diagnosed in first grade all the way up through the rest of elementary school. And that was very helpful, and did I need it that much after that? No, not necessarily, because I found sports by that point. But at the same time, like getting that help was very critical towards getting me to the place where I am today as someone who's happy about all this and who's living a good life. It's like finding these ways, such as through therapy, such as through medication, such as through sports, to help deal with this kind of stuff. That's the single best way that you can feel normal, you can feel good, you can just feel like this isn't what it sounds for a lot of people initially as like this huge condition that's going to bring, like, drag you to the end of your life. It's like, it's absolutely not that at all,
it's never felt like it's interesting. We can kind of end on this. I've never felt like I have a condition. Do you know what I mean? Like, I never felt like anxiety is a condition or ADHD is a condition. I mean, maybe they are, but it's like, it's just a way of describing how my brain works, in the same way that like having blue eyes is not a condition or a gap between my teeth. I mean, maybe a dentist would say it is a condition.
I don't know, man.
Right?
I don't know. Like, I don't want the answer.
Right. But like, it's just always, I never even think about these things as a condition. It's just like the flavor that my brain is. And it's just who I am. Like I don't really even will any of these things away. I just work to kind of balance out the stuff so that I can be me, but still like sleep decently at night and function during the day.
Yeah, that's a great way to end on. That totally makes sense, man. Well, I guess with that, I would just love to say thank you so much for joining us. If anyone here that's listening is in London right now, please know that Jason will be teaching for a month. So if you have any interest in going to get taught by this guy, please sign up. But other than that, I would just like to say, Jason, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you again on soon. But
anytime, man. Awesome. Really, really, really great questions, really great conversations. Nice to connect in this way, Keegan.
That's great, man. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode today. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like and share it with others. And if you're looking for more great content, you can subscribe or follow us on this platform, or go to our website at www.sportsonthespectrum.net. And if you think that you'd have a story worth sharing, don't hesitate to fill out a form on our website for the opportunity to be a guest on a future episode. Until then, be sure to stay safe, have fun, get dirty, and I will see you on the next episode of Sports on the Spectrum.